The wind howled across the training grounds of Camp Toccoa, Georgia, whipping through the pine trees with a force that made even the most experienced marksman grimace. It was November 1942, and the air carried the bite of approaching winter mixed with the tension of young men preparing for a war that seemed both distant and terrifyingly close. On the firing range, a thin piece of cotton string danced in the breeze, tied carefully to the barrel of a Springfield rifle held by Corporal James Mitchell, a 22-year-old from rural Montana whose calloused hands spoke of years working his family's ranch before the war called him away. The string method wasn't something James had read in any manual or learned from any instructor. It was born from necessity, from those countless mornings on the ranch when his father would send him out before dawn to shoot coyotes threatening their livestock, when the Montana wind would gust strong enough to knock a bullet off course by several inches. His father, a veteran of the Great War, who rarely spoke of his experiences in the Argonne forest, had shown him the technique one morning after James missed 3 shots in a row. The old man had tied a piece of thread to the end of his hunting rifle and explained in his quiet, deliberate way how the string would show the true direction and strength of the wind at the barrel's end, where it mattered most. James had perfected the technique over years of hunting, but he never imagined he would need it here, among soldiers who came from cities and towns where wind was just something that messed up your hair. If you are enjoying this story and want to see more content like this, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring you more incredible, true-to-life stories from history. Sergeant Frank Dawson stood 20 feet behind James, his arms crossed over his broad chest, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. Dawson was a career soldier, 38 years old, with a face weathered by sun and discipline. He had trained hundreds of recruits and had seen every type of soldier imaginable, or so he thought. The string tied to Mitchell's rifle struck him as the most absurd thing he had witnessed in 15 years of military service. Next to him, Sergeant William Burke let out a low chuckle, shaking his head in disbelief. "Hey, Mitchell," Burke called out, his voice carrying across the range with practiced authority. "What in God's name is that supposed to be? You planning to fly a kite or shoot a rifle?" The other recruits on the line turned to look, and ripples of laughter spread through the ranks. Private Tommy Rodriguez, a wiry kid from Los Angeles with quick hands and a quicker mouth, elbowed his buddy and whispered something that made them both laugh. Even Lieutenant Harrison, observing from the officers' area, raised an eyebrow at the unusual sight. James felt the heat rise in his cheeks, but he kept his eyes forward, his jaw set in that stubborn way his mother always said would get him in trouble someday. "Sir," James responded, his voice steady despite the embarrassment burning through him. "It helps me read the wind at barrel level. Back home we used this technique for long-distance shooting in high wind conditions." Dawson walked closer, his boots crunching on the gravel. He stopped directly behind James, close enough that the corporal could smell the coffee on his breath and the starch in his uniform. "Back home," the sergeant said slowly, emphasizing each word. "You were shooting rabbits and maybe deer if you were lucky. This is the United States Army, son. We do things the proper way here. We use our training, our instincts, and our equipment as issued. We don't tie strings to government property like we're playing cowboys and Indians." A few more chuckles erupted from the line. James's grip tightened on the rifle, his knuckles going white. He had faced this kind of dismissal before, growing up as the quiet ranch kid who preferred the company of horses to people, who read books under trees while other boys played baseball in town. But this was different. This was about more than just fitting in. This was about preparing for combat, about learning to be effective when lives would depend on it. "Sergeant," James said, turning slightly to meet Dawson's eyes, "with respect, I understand the proper techniques. I scored expert on every qualification we've done so far. But today the wind is gusting at 15 to 20 miles per hour from the northwest, varying in intensity every few seconds. The flags are showing general direction, but they're too far from our position to show the micro changes that will affect bullet trajectory at 300 yards. This string shows me exactly what the wind is doing at my barrel in real time. Dawson's expression hardened. The amusement left his eyes, replaced by something colder. Around them, the laughter died down as the other soldiers sensed the shift in atmosphere. Lieutenant Harrison had moved closer, now watching the exchange with interest. The wind picked up again, strong enough to make the flags snap loudly and send dried leaves skittering across the range. "Is that so?" Dawson said, his voice dropping to a tone that every soldier recognized as dangerous. "You think you know better than army doctrine, better than the training that's been refined over decades, better than the methods that won the last war?" James swallowed hard, but held his ground. "No, sir. I think different conditions require different adaptations. The manual teaches us to read wind, using flags, grass movement, and mirage effects through the scope. All good methods. But in rapidly changing conditions, having a real time indicator at the barrel provides additional precise information that can make the difference between a hit and a miss." Burke stepped forward, his face red with irritation. "Listen to this college boy," he said. Though James had never been to college, had barely finished high school before his father's health declined and he was needed full-time on the ranch. Thinks he's smarter than everyone else. Thinks he can reinvent marksmanship because he shot some tin cans off fence posts in Montana. The words stung more than James wanted to admit. He had never thought himself better than anyone. He just wanted to hit his targets, to be ready for whatever was coming. The news from Europe grew darker every day. Stories of fierce German resistance, of American boys dying in North Africa, of the preparations for an eventual invasion of the continent. Every soldier knew that their training here would directly impact their survival over there. James simply wanted every advantage he could get. "All right, Mitchell," Dawson said, a thin smile crossing his face. "Since you're so confident in your little string trick, let us put it to the test. You see those targets at 300 yards, at 10 shots. If you can hit center mass on at least 8 out of 10, I will personally apologize and recommend your method to the company commander. But when you fail, when you embarrass yourself with this nonsense, you're going to run the obstacle course in full gear every evening for a week, and you are going to remove that ridiculous string and never let me see anything like it again. Deal?" James felt his stomach tighten. 300 yards in this wind was challenging for anyone. The gusts were inconsistent, sometimes calm, sometimes fierce. But he knew his method worked. He had used it successfully for years. The real question was whether his nerves would hold under this pressure, with everyone watching, waiting for him to fail. "Deal," he said quietly. "What was that?" Dawson barked. "Deal, sir," James repeated louder, meeting the sergeant's eyes. "Outstanding," Dawson said, stepping back. "Everyone hold your fire. Mitchell here is going to give us a demonstration. Lieutenant Harrison, would you care to observe?" The lieutenant nodded, moving to a position where he could see both the shooter and the targets downrange. He was younger than the sergeants, maybe 28, a West Point graduate with a reputation for fairness, but also for following regulations to the letter. James could not read his expression. The other soldiers on the line put down their weapons and turned to watch. James could feel their eyes on him, could hear their whispered comments and predictions. Most thought he would fail. Tommy Rodriguez was taking bets, giving 2-to-1 odds against James hitting 8 targets. Only one soldier, Private First Class Daniel Chen from San Francisco, a quiet guy who kept to himself and read technical manuals in his spare time, seemed to be withholding judgment. James moved to the firing position, settling into a prone stance. He checked his rifle, ensuring everything was properly secured. The string, just 6 inches of white cotton thread, fluttered from the end of the barrel, dancing in the erratic wind. He took a slow breath, feeling his heart rate, consciously working to slow it down the way his father had taught him. In shooting, his father would say, "Your worst enemy is yourself. Your breathing, your heartbeat, your rushing mind. Master those, and the target becomes easy." Through his scope, the target looked small but clear, a black silhouette against a tan background, marked with concentric circles, indicating scoring zones. The wind pushed at him from the right, varying in strength. James watched the string, noting how it would hang limp for a moment, then suddenly stream out to the side, then relax again. The pattern was chaotic, but within the chaos there was information. He waited, watching the string, feeling the wind on his face, listening to its sound as it moved through the range. His finger rested lightly on the trigger, ready but not tense. This was the art of it, the part that could not be taught in a classroom. Knowing when to shoot, when the brief moment of opportunity appeared in the midst of chaos. The string went limp. Just for a second, maybe two. James exhaled half his breath and squeezed the trigger in one smooth motion. The rifle bucked against his shoulder, the familiar recoil, the sharp crack of the shot. Downrange, a marker went up. Center mass, one down. He worked the bolt, chambering another round. The spent casing clinked onto the ground beside him. Again he waited, watching the string. The wind gusted hard to the right. The string stretched out nearly horizontal. He held his fire, patient, counting his heartbeats. Then the gust passed. The string relaxed, swung slightly left as the wind shifted, then hung straight for just a moment. Squeeze. Crack. Recoil. Another marker. Center mass. Two down. Behind him, the whispers had stopped. The range was quiet except for the wind and the sound of flags snapping. James was barely aware of the audience anymore. He had entered that state his father called the zone, where the world narrowed to just you, your weapon, and your target. Where time seemed to slow and every detail became crystal clear. Third shot, wait for it, wait. String goes limp, squeeze, hit. Fourth shot, strong gust from the right, wait it out, wait. Wind shifts slightly left, compensate, squeeze, hit. Fifth shot. The rhythm now, feeling the pattern. Breath, watch, wait, squeeze, hit. Halfway through. His shoulder ached slightly from the recoil, but he ignored it. His breathing remained steady, measured. Each shot was its own moment, its own small battle against physics and nature. Sixth shot. A longer wait this time. The wind was being stubborn, gusting erratically. He watched the string dance, violent movements that would send a bullet far off target. Then a lull. He took it, hit seventh shot. His confidence growing now, but he fought against it. Overconfidence was dangerous, led to rushing to mistakes. Treat each shot with the same respect. Watch, wait, squeeze, hit. 3 shots left. He needed one more hit to meet the challenge, 2 more to exceed it. The wind seemed to sense his thoughts, picked up in intensity. The string stretched out hard to the right, stayed there. 15 seconds, 20, 30. James waited, his finger never wavering from its light pressure on the trigger. Patience was not just a virtue in shooting, it was everything. Finally, a break. The briefest lull. He took it instantly, hit, 8 down. The challenge met. He could stop now, could declare victory. But something in him, some stubborn pride or maybe just the desire to prove beyond any doubt that his method worked, pushed him forward. 9th shot. He took his time, no rush now. Watched the pattern for a full minute, chose his moment perfectly. The shot felt good the instant he took it, that sensation every shooter knows when everything aligns. Hit. 1 shot left, 1 bullet to make it perfect, to leave no room for doubt or dismissal. The wind had other ideas. It picked up again, stronger than before, howling across the range with force that made several of the watching soldiers step back. The string on James's rifle streamed out at a severe angle, vibrating with the force of the gust. He waited. 30 seconds became a minute. The minute stretched toward 2. His shoulder ached. His eyes watered from staring through the scope. But he waited, trusting his method, trusting his training, trusting that patience would be rewarded. Then it happened. The wind just stopped. Not gradually, but suddenly, as if someone had flipped a switch. The string went completely limp, hanging straight down from the barrel. James did not hesitate. He knew this dead calm might last only a second or two. He squeezed the trigger, smooth and certain. The shot rang out. For a moment that felt eternal, everyone stared downrange. Then the marker went up. Center mass, perfect score. 10 out of 10. The silence that followed was profound. James worked the bolt one last time, ensuring his weapon was clear, then engaged the safety and stood up. His legs were slightly stiff from holding the prone position, but he forced himself to move normally, to not show any sign of the adrenaline that was surging through his system. He turned to face Sergeant Dawson. The sergeant's face was unreadable, a carefully controlled mask that revealed nothing of what he might be thinking. Sergeant Burke looked stunned, his mouth slightly open. Lieutenant Harrison was nodding slowly, his expression thoughtful. "Sergeant Dawson," James said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "Request permission to retrieve my targets for verification." Dawson stared at him for a long moment, then nodded curtly. Permission granted. James walked down range with Corporal Lee, who served as the range safety officer. The 300-yard walk felt longer than it was, each step giving him time to process what had just happened. He had done it. He had proven his method under the worst possible conditions, with everyone watching and expecting failure. The targets confirmed what the markers had indicated. 10 shots, 10 hits, all in center mass. Several were so close to perfect center that they nearly overlapped. Corporal Lee whistled low, shaking his head in amazement. "I have never seen anyone shoot that well in wind like this," Lee said. "That string thing, does it really help that much?" James shrugged. "It gives me information I can use. Whether it helps depends on whether you know what to do with the information. The string is just a tool. Understanding wind, that is what matters." They returned to the firing line, James carrying his target. He presented it to Lieutenant Harrison, who examined it carefully before passing it to Sergeant Dawson. The sergeant looked at each hole, his jaw working slightly, a muscle twitching in his cheek. Finally, Dawson looked up at James. His expression was still controlled, but something had shifted in his eyes. "Corporal Mitchell," he said formally, "I made you a promise. I keep my promises. Your shooting was exceptional. Your method, unconventional as it is, clearly has merit." He paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. "However," he continued, "we cannot have everyone on the line tying strings to their rifles. It goes against regulation, against uniformity, against everything the Army stands for regarding standardization of equipment and technique." James felt his victory slipping away, but before he could respond, Lieutenant Harrison spoke up. "Sergeant Dawson, if I may," the lieutenant said, "the Army also stands for effectiveness in combat. We are not training these men to look good on parade grounds. We are training them to kill the enemy and stay alive while doing it. If Corporal Mitchell has developed a technique that improves accuracy in difficult conditions, we should be studying it, not suppressing it." Dawson's face tightened, but he could not argue with an officer. "Sir, with respect, the regulations are clear about modifications to weapons." "The string is not a modification," Harrison replied. "It is an external aid, like a wind flag or a weather vane, just a smaller, more portable version." He turned to James. "Corporal, can you teach this technique?" James thought for a moment. "Yes, sir. The string itself is simple. Anyone can tie a piece of thread to their barrel. The skill is in reading what it tells you and knowing when to shoot. That takes practice and understanding wind patterns, understanding how your specific weapon is affected at different ranges." "How long would it take to teach someone?" Harrison asked. "Depends on the person, sir. Someone with good shooting fundamentals already could pick up the basics in an afternoon. Mastering it, really understanding it, might take weeks of practice. But even a basic understanding would improve accuracy in wind conditions. Harrison looked at Dawson. "Sergeant, I want Corporal Mitchell to conduct a wind shooting clinic for any interested marksman in the company. Voluntary attendance, off-duty hours. We will see if others can replicate his results. If they can, we will write up a report for battalion. If this technique has value, it should be shared." Dawson's jaw clenched, but he nodded. "Yes, sir. As you order." "Outstanding," Harrison said. "Carry on." He walked away, leaving James alone with the two sergeants and the assembled soldiers. Dawson stepped closer to James, lowering his voice so only James could hear. "You made me look bad today, Mitchell. I do not like being made to look bad. But you also showed skill and discipline under pressure that I respect. So here is how this is going to work. You will teach your little clinic. You will be professional and respectful. And if I hear any bragging, any showboating, any attitude from you about this, I will make your life so difficult you will wish you had missed every shot today. Clear?" "Crystal clear, Sergeant," James replied. "Good." Dawson stepped back, raised his voice. "All right. Show is over. Everyone back on the line. We have qualifications to complete. Mitchell, you are done for the day. Go clean your weapon and that ridiculous string off your barrel. Dismissed." James saluted and walked away. Behind him, he could hear the buzz of conversation starting up again, everyone discussing what they had just witnessed. As he headed toward the barracks, Daniel Chen jogged up beside him. "That was incredible," Chen said quietly. "I've been reading about ballistics and wind effects, but seeing you work was like watching theory become practice. Will you really teach others?" "If they want to learn," James said, "though I suspect most will not bother. It is easier to blame misses on bad luck than to actually work at reading conditions." "I want to learn," Chen said firmly. "When do we start?" Word of James's shooting spread through the company like wildfire. By evening, everyone knew about the string, the challenge, and the perfect score. Reactions were mixed. Some soldiers, like Chen, were genuinely interested in learning. Others dismissed it as a fluke or luck. A few, particularly those who had laughed loudest that morning, avoided James altogether, embarrassed by their earlier mockery. Tommy Rodriguez approached James in the mess hall, sliding his tray onto the table across from him. "Listen, Mitchell," he said, "I may have been a bit rough on you this morning. That was some solid shooting. You think you could show me that string trick?" James looked at him, noting the sincerity beneath the casual tone. "Sure," he said. "We are starting informal sessions tomorrow evening after duty hours. Anyone who wants to learn is welcome." The first session drew 12 soldiers, including both privates and a few corporals. James had spent the afternoon preparing, thinking about how to break down what he did instinctively into steps that others could follow. He started with the basics, explaining wind patterns, how wind affects bullet trajectory, why reading wind at the barrel is more accurate than reading flags 50 feet away. The group gathered in a semicircle around him on the edge of the range, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the Georgia clay. James held up his rifle, the string already attached, and began his explanation. "Wind is not constant," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the quiet evening air. "Even when it feels steady to you standing here, it is changing every second. Speed, direction, intensity. Those changes happen in layers, at different heights, over different distances. A flag 200 yards away might show you wind moving left to right at 10 miles per hour. But right here, at your barrel, where the bullet starts its journey, the wind might be completely different." He demonstrated, having the group watch as he pointed out how grass near the ground moved differently than flags higher up. How wind would gust and lull, how local terrain features like berms and buildings created eddies and dead zones. Chen took notes in a small notebook he always carried. his engineer's mind organizing the information into categories and principles. Rodriguez watched with intense focus, his earlier skepticism replaced by genuine curiosity. Now the string, James continued, is not magic. It will not make you a better shooter by itself. What it does is give you immediate, precise information about wind conditions at the exact point where your bullet begins its flight. This is the most critical measurement point because this is where the bullet is slowest, where it is most affected by wind. He showed them how to tie the string, demonstrating several different knots and attachment methods. The string should be light enough to move freely in even gentle breeze, he explained, but strong enough not to break. Cotton thread works well. Too heavy and it will not respond to light winds. Too light and it becomes erratic and hard to read. He had them practice tying strings to their own rifles, walking among them to check each soldier's work. Private Marcus Webb, a farm boy from Iowa with thick fingers more accustomed to tractor work than delicate knots, struggled with the attachment. James knelt beside him, demonstrating slowly. Loop it here, around the front sight post, double knot, but not too tight. You want to be able to remove it quickly if needed. The string should hang free, about 4 to 6 inches, long enough to show movement clearly, short enough that it does not get tangled. Webb finally got it right on the 4th try, his face breaking into a satisfied grin. Got it, Corporal, thanks. The real skill, James continued once everyone had their strings attached, comes in interpretation. He had them all stand in a line, rifles pointed downrange in a safe direction, and simply observe their strings for 5 minutes. Just watch, he instructed. Do not try to analyze yet. Just watch how they move. Notice patterns, notice changes. The group stood silently, a line of soldiers staring at pieces of thread dancing in the wind. To anyone passing by, it would have looked absurd. But James saw them beginning to see what he saw, their eyes tracking movements, noticing how a gust would hit them in sequence down the line, how the strings would all react slightly differently based on their position and the local terrain around each man. After 5 minutes, he had them share observations. Rodriguez spoke first. The wind is not consistent. Sometimes my string hangs almost straight, then suddenly it is pointing hard to the right. No pattern I can see. That is the first lesson, James said, accepting that wind is chaotic. You cannot predict it perfectly. But you can learn to recognize moments of opportunity within that chaos. Chen, what did you notice? Chen consulted his notes. The gusts seemed to come in waves, approximately every 15 to 20 seconds. Between gusts, there are brief periods of relative calm, usually lasting 2 to 4 seconds. Also, the wind direction shifts slightly, usually staying within a 20-degree arc, but occasionally varying more widely. Excellent observation, James said. That pattern varies by location, by weather conditions, by time of day. But learning to see patterns, even temporary ones, helps you predict when those windows of opportunity will appear. They practiced dry firing next, still without ammunition. James had them pick targets downrange and practice the entire sequence. Watch the string, wait for the right moment, squeeze the trigger smoothly. He walked the line, offering individual coaching. To Webb, he said, "You are rushing. The moment you see the string calm down, you are immediately pulling the trigger, but you need to confirm the shot is right first. Check your sight picture, confirm your target, then squeeze. All of that happens in maybe half a second, but you have to do it every time." To a private named Kowalski from Detroit, he offered different advice. You are waiting too long. You see your moment, but then you second-guess yourself, and by the time you decide to shoot, the moment has passed. Trust your initial read. If it looks right, it probably is right. Hesitation is the enemy. They moved to live fire the next session, starting at just 100 yards to build confidence. James had each soldier take 5 shots using the string technique while he observed and coached. The results were mixed. Chen shot well immediately, his analytical mind translating theory into practice smoothly. Rodriguez struggled initially, his impatience causing him to shoot during marginal conditions, but improved rapidly as he forced himself to wait. Webb surprised everyone, including himself, by shooting exceptionally well. Turns out his years of hunting ducks back in Iowa had given him an intuitive feel for leading moving targets and compensating for wind. The string just gave him better information to work with. After his fifth shot, all of which hit center mass, he looked at his target in amazement. "I never shot this good before," he said quietly. "That is because you have always had the skill," James told him. "You just needed the right tool to unlock it." Sergeant Burke showed up halfway through the second session, again watching from a distance. This time he came over afterward to speak with James privately. "I have been watching your students, Mitchell, not just here, but on the regular range during qualifications. The ones who stick with your method, who really practice it, they are showing measurable improvement. 3.5% average increase in hit probability at ranges over 200 yards in wind conditions. That is significant." James was surprised Burke had been tracking statistics. "Thank you, Sergeant. That means we are doing something right." Burke nodded, then added something unexpected. "I tried it myself, yesterday, on my own time. The string thing." He paused, seeming almost embarrassed. "It works. I'm not too proud to admit when I'm wrong. Your method has value. Keep teaching it." Over the following weeks, the training sessions expanded. More soldiers heard about the results and wanted to learn. James started holding sessions 3 evenings a week, sometimes with 20 or more attendees. He developed a more structured curriculum, starting with wind reading basics, progressing through string attachment and interpretation, then advancing to practical application under various conditions. He also began adapting the technique for different scenarios. For close-range urban combat, where the string might be impractical, he taught soldiers to read wind using other indicators, grass movement, dust patterns, the feel of wind on their faces. The string was a tool for precision shooting, but the underlying principles of wind awareness applied to all shooting situations. Chen helped him create written materials, simple instruction sheets that could be distributed to other units. They worked together several nights, Chen's technical writing skills translating James's practical knowledge into clear, step-by-step procedures. Rodriguez contributed too, offering insights from a student's perspective on what had been most helpful in learning the technique. During one late-night session, just the 3 of them working by lamplight in the barracks, Rodriguez voiced something they were all thinking. "This thing we are doing, building something bigger than just us, it feels important, like we are contributing something that might help guys survive over there." James looked up from the instruction sheet they were editing. "That is the hope. We cannot control what happens in combat, but if we can give soldiers even a small edge, better tools, better knowledge, maybe that makes a difference." "That is what I like about this," Chen added. "It is democratic. Any soldier can learn this, can benefit from it. You do not need special equipment or elite training, just a piece of string and the willingness to practice." They worked into the early morning hours, refining their materials, preparing their next training sessions, building something they hoped would outlast their time at Camp Toccoa and make a real difference when the shooting started for real. Sergeant Burke showed up halfway through the first session, standing at the back, observing silently. James half expected him to cause trouble, but Burke just watched, his expression neutral. At the end, he approached James. "Not bad, Mitchell," Burke said gruffly. "You have a decent teaching style, clear instructions, good demonstrations. Maybe you missed your calling as an instructor." "Thank you, Sergeant," James replied cautiously. Burke nodded, then surprised him by asking, "This technique of yours, you said your father taught it to you?" "Yes, Sergeant. He was a scout sniper in the Great War. He never talked much about the fighting, but he taught me everything about shooting." Smart man, Burke said. Sometimes the old ways, the simple ways, work best. The army loves its fancy equipment and new methods, but there is something to be said for practical knowledge passed down. Keep up the good work. He walked away before James could respond. Over the next few weeks, James's students made steady progress. Chen proved to be a natural, grasping the concepts quickly and applying them with precision. Rodriguez struggled at first, too impatient, wanting quick results, but gradually learned the value of waiting for the right moment. Others fell somewhere in between, some showing aptitude, others finding the technique too finicky or too slow. Lieutenant Harrison observed several sessions, taking notes, occasionally asking questions. He seemed genuinely interested in the technique's potential applications. During one session, he pulled James aside. "Corporal, I have been thinking about your method. Have you considered its application for actual combat scenarios, not just range shooting, but tactical situations?" James had thought about little else since the demonstration. "Sir," he said carefully, "in combat, conditions are obviously much different than a controlled range. Stress, fear, enemy fire, all of that affects shooting, but the fundamentals remain the same. Wind still affects bullets. Being able to read that wind accurately could make the difference in hitting or missing a target, especially at longer ranges." Harrison nodded. "I am writing a report for battalion headquarters. I want to include your thoughts on combat applications. Also," he added almost casually, "we are getting orders soon, probably North Africa or Europe. Whatever your method is called, it might prove valuable in actual combat conditions." The weight of those words settled on James. This was no longer about proving a point to skeptical sergeants or teaching interested soldiers. This was about survival, about effectiveness when lives hung in the balance. The thought both excited and terrified him. The orders came in early January 1943. The company was shipping out to England, part of the build-up for eventual operations in Europe. The news sent a wave of mixed emotions through the ranks. Excitement at finally seeing action, fear of the unknown, sadness at leaving behind the familiar routines of training. James spent his last few weeks at Camp Tokoa, continuing the wind shooting sessions, but also preparing himself mentally for what was coming. He wrote letters home, carefully worded to avoid worrying his parents, but honest about his circumstances. His father's response arrived 2 days before departure, a rare, lengthy letter from a man of few written words. The old man wrote about pride and fear, about his own experiences in France, about the importance of staying alert and trusting your training. But the last paragraph stuck with James, reading it over several times. "You found something that works for you," his father wrote. "Something that gives you an edge. Hold on to that. In combat, edges make the difference, but remember that the best shooting technique in the world means nothing if you lose your humanity. Stay sharp, stay alive, stay yourself. Come home to us." The crossing to England was rough, the Atlantic in winter showing no mercy to the transport ships. Most soldiers spent the voyage sick, miserable, crammed into tight quarters below deck. James used the time to keep his skills sharp, mentally rehearsing wind-reading techniques, visualizing different scenarios, preparing his mind for combat. They landed in Liverpool in February, then moved to a training camp in the English countryside. The weather was cold, wet and windy, but the landscape reminded James a bit of Montana, rolling hills and big skies. The company integrated with other units, conducted joint exercises, prepared for whatever mission they would eventually receive. Here, away from the structured environment of Camp Tokoa, James found his wind shooting technique spreading organically. Soldiers from other units heard about it, asked for demonstrations, wanted to learn. Some officers were skeptical, but others were pragmatic. If it worked, they wanted their men to know it. James conducted more training sessions, refined his teaching methods, learned to adapt to different learning styles and skill levels. He also continued to develop the technique himself, experimenting with different string materials, different lengths, different attachment methods. Chen helped him document everything, creating rough instruction manuals that could be copied and distributed. In April, they received their combat assignment. The company would be part of the upcoming invasion of Sicily, Operation Husky, scheduled for July. The news was both relieving and terrifying. After months of training and waiting, they would finally see action. The reality of combat, of actual life and death, moved from abstract possibility to imminent certainty. Training intensified, live fire exercises, amphibious landing drills, urban combat practice. Every day pushed them harder, preparing them for the chaos to come. James noticed changes in himself and his fellow soldiers. The joking and casual atmosphere of training camp gave way to a more serious, focused mentality. They were becoming not just soldiers, but warriors preparing for battle. During a field exercise in late May, James found himself paired with Sergeant Dawson for a reconnaissance patrol. It was the first time they had worked together closely since the shooting demonstration months earlier. The sergeant had been correct but distant since then, professional but not warm. They moved through the English countryside in silence for the first hour, practicing stealth movement, observing terrain, completing their assigned objectives. During a rest break, Dawson spoke up. "Mitchell," he said, his voice low, "I owe you an apology." James looked up, surprised. "Sir?" Dawson sighed, looking out over the landscape. "Back at Tokoa, I was wrong. Not just about your shooting technique, though I was wrong about that too. I was wrong in how I handled it. Wrong to mock you in front of the men. Wrong to let my pride get in the way of recognizing something valuable." "Sergeant, you do not need to," James started, but Dawson cut him off. "Yes, I do. In combat, which we will be seeing soon enough, effectiveness matters more than pride. You showed effectiveness. I showed pride. That was backwards. Since then, I have seen your technique help a lot of soldiers improve their shooting. I have seen men gain confidence because they have a tool that works. That matters." He paused, then continued. "I have been in the army a long time, Mitchell. Sometimes that makes you rigid, makes you resist change, because we have always done things a certain way. But you reminded me that smart soldiers adapt, innovate, find better ways. That is worth more than blind adherence to regulation." "Thank you, Sergeant," James said quietly. "That means a lot." They completed the patrol in companionable silence, a mutual respect forming that had not existed before. When they reported back to Lieutenant Harrison, Dawson added an unsolicited comment to his report. "Sir," he said, "for the upcoming operation, I recommend Corporal Mitchell be designated as one of our designated marksmen. His skills and techniques could prove valuable in combat situations requiring precision fire." Harrison looked between them, a slight smile crossing his face. "Noted, Sergeant. I was planning the same recommendation. The weeks before the invasion passed in a blur of final preparations, equipment checks, briefings, and more briefings." James found himself assigned to a rifle squad as their designated marksman, responsible for engaging targets at longer ranges, providing overwatch during movements, taking out priority targets as needed. He spent time zeroing his rifle for the expected conditions in Sicily, hot weather and Mediterranean winds. He prepared several strings of different materials, tucked them carefully into his gear. He wrote what might be his final letters home, though he tried not to think of them that way. The night before they boarded ships for Sicily, James sat with Chen, Rodriguez, and a few others from his wind shooting sessions. They did not talk about the upcoming battle directly, instead sharing stories from home, memories of peaceful times, dreams of what they would do after the war. "You think that string trick will work in actual combat?" Rodriguez asked eventually, the question everyone was thinking. "I do not know," James answered honestly. "I know it works on ranges, in training. Combat is different, more chaotic, more variables. But the physics do not change. Wind still affects bullets. Reading that wind should still matter. Just do not get so focused on your string that you miss the enemy shooting at you. Chen joked, though there was an edge of nervousness in his voice. The invasion of Sicily began in the early morning hours of July 10th, 1943. The amphibious landing was chaos, exactly as bad as their training had suggested, and worse. Explosions, gunfire, confusion, fear. James hit the beach with his squad, running through the surf, diving for cover, trying to orient himself in the madness. The reality of combat struck him like a physical blow. The training had been intense, realistic even, but nothing could truly prepare anyone for this. The sound was overwhelming, a constant roar of explosions, machine gun fire, screaming men, and the crash of waves against the landing craft. The smell hit him next, cordite and salt water, and something else, something metallic and terrible that he would later recognize as blood and death. Sergeant Burke was ahead of him, shouting orders that James could barely hear over the din. The squad moved forward in rushes, using every bit of cover the beach offered, which was precious little. Private Webb went down hard, taking a round in the leg. James and Rodriguez dragged him to cover behind a disabled tank, applied a tourniquet, while bullets kicked up sand around them. "You are going to be fine," James told Webb, though he had no idea if that was true. "The medic will get to you. Hang on." Webb's face was pale with shock and pain, but he nodded, gritting his teeth. "Get that bastard who shot me," he managed to say. The first hours were pure survival. Moving forward under fire, taking objectives, clearing positions. There was no time for precision shooting, no opportunity to set up careful shots. It was close quarters combat, fast and brutal. James fired his rifle more times in those first few hours than he had in months of training, shooting at movement, at muzzle flashes, at targets that appeared and disappeared in seconds. Chen was right beside him through most of it. The two of them working together instinctively, covering each other, calling out targets, moving in coordinated rushes. At one point they had to clear a small concrete bunker. Chen threw in a grenade. James went in immediately after the explosion, clearing the space with quick close-range shots. When they came out, both of them were shaking, adrenaline making their hands tremble. "This is real," Chen said, his voice tight. "This is actually real." James just nodded, unable to find words. They had known intellectually that combat would be like this, but knowing and experiencing were entirely different things. By the end of the first day, they had pushed inland about a mile, securing several key positions. The squad had taken casualties. Webb was evacuated, along with two others who were wounded more seriously. Private Kowalski from their wind-shooting training sessions was dead, killed by artillery in the first hour of the landing. James tried not to think about it, tried to focus on the mission, on survival, on the next objective. They dug in that night, establishing defensive positions, preparing for possible counterattacks. James sat in his foxhole, his rifle across his lap, the string still in his pack, unused, seemingly irrelevant to the chaos of the past day. Rodriguez dropped into the foxhole beside him, bringing rations and water. "Hell of a day," Rodriguez said, his usual humor gone, replaced by a hollow exhaustion. "Yeah," James replied. They sat in silence for a while, eating without tasting, drinking because they knew they had to. Around them, the night was filled with sounds, distant gunfire, someone crying quietly, radio chatter, the rustle of nervous soldiers checking their weapons again and again. "You think we will get a chance to use that wind-shooting stuff?" Rodriguez asked eventually. "Or is it all going to be like today, just chaos and close range?" James considered the question. "I do not know. Maybe both. Combat is not just one thing. We might hit situations where precision matters. We need to be ready for everything." He pulled out his string, checked it in the dim light. It was still intact, still ready. The familiar feel of it, the simple cotton thread, was oddly comforting. A connection to training, to preparation, to a time when things made sense. The second day brought different challenges. As they pushed inland and the fighting spread out across the Sicilian countryside, the combat became less chaotic but no less dangerous. They moved through olive groves and small villages, encountering resistance that varied from light to intense. The terrain was broken, hills and valleys, stone walls and winding roads. The platoon was advancing through a valley when they started taking fire from elevated positions. Lieutenant Harrison called a halt, got everyone into cover, and began assessing the situation. James worked his way forward to where Harrison and Burke were studying the terrain through binoculars. "We have got a problem," Harrison said, pointing up at a hilltop farmhouse about 400 yards away. "Machine gun nest up there, good field of fire over this whole valley. We try to advance, they will cut us to pieces. We try to go around, adds 3 hours to our route, and there is no guarantee we will not hit more resistance." "Can we call in artillery?" Burke asked. Harrison shook his head. "Too close to civilian structures. Command is trying to minimize collateral damage. We need a precision solution." Both men turned to look at James. He realized what they were thinking even before Harrison spoke. "Mitchell, think you can take out that gunner?" James pulled out his binoculars, studied the position. The farmhouse was old stone, thick walls, small windows. He could see the machine gun barrel protruding from one window, could occasionally glimpse movement behind it. The range was significant, 400 yards, maybe a bit more. And the wind was picking up as afternoon approached, blowing across the valley in gusts. "It is a tough shot, sir," he said honestly. "Long range, elevated target, strong wind, small window of opportunity when the gunner exposes himself." "Can you make it?" Harrison pressed. James thought about the demonstration back at Tokoa, about all the training sessions, about every shot he had practiced. He thought about Kowalski, dead on the beach, about Webb, wounded and evacuated, about every soldier in the platoon whose life might depend on taking out that gun. "Give me 5 minutes to set up and study the conditions," he said. "I will tell you if it is possible." They found him a good position behind a low stone wall, stable shooting platform, good view of the target. James settled in, got comfortable, then pulled out his string and tied it to his barrel. Around him several soldiers noticed and word spread quickly. "Mitchell is using his string trick. Mitchell is taking the shot." Chen crawled up beside him, bringing extra ammunition and water. "You need anything?" he asked quietly. "Just quiet and time," James replied, his focus already narrowing to the task ahead. He studied the target through his scope, getting familiar with every detail. The machine gun position, the wall around the window, the shadows inside where the gunner would be. Then he shifted his attention to the wind. This was the critical part, reading the conditions, understanding the challenge. The string told him immediately that this would be difficult. The wind was gusty and inconsistent, blowing hard from his left, then easing, then gusting again. There was no steady pattern, no predictable rhythm. He would have to wait for a perfect moment, a combination of calm wind and the gunner exposing himself. Chen watched the string with him, his analytical mind processing the data. "Wind is averaging about 12 to 15 miles per hour from the west," he whispered. "Gusts up to 20 or 22. You are going to need a dead calm moment, and the target visible at exactly the same time." "I know," James said. "That might not happen," Chen continued. "The probability of those two variables aligning is low." "I know," James repeated, "but we wait anyway, because probability is not certainty." 2 minutes passed, 3. The machine gun fired several bursts, keeping the platoon pinned down. James could hear Harrison on the radio, reporting the situation to company headquarters, buying time. He knew that time was limited. Eventually, command would order them to withdraw or to assault, despite the casualties that would result. 4 minutes. The wind was being stubborn, maintaining strong pressure from the left. The string streamed out, barely wavering from its extended position. James's eye was starting to water from staring through the scope, but he forced himself to stay focused, to stay patient. Then the German gunner made a mistake. He leaned out too far, probably trying to get a better angle on the Americans below. James saw him clearly for the first time, a young man, maybe younger than James himself, with light hair and a face tight with concentration. But the wind was still too strong. James held his fire, watching the string, watching the target. The gunner stayed exposed, probably thinking he was safe at this range, probably not expecting precision rifle fire. The wind began to ease. The string's angle decreased slightly. James's finger moved to the trigger, taking up slack, ready but not rushing. His breathing slowed. His heart rate dropped into that zone where everything became clear. The string went limp. Not completely vertical, but close enough. In that same instant, James confirmed his sight picture, confirmed the target was still there, and began his trigger squeeze. The rifle kicked against his shoulder. The shot felt right the moment he took it, that perfect sensation where muscle memory and training and instinct all align. Through the scope, he saw the German gunner jerk backward and disappear. The rifle kicked. 400 yards away, the German gunner jerked back and disappeared. The machine gun went silent. For a moment no one moved, uncertainty hanging in the air. Then Lieutenant Harrison confirmed through his binoculars. "Target down!" he shouted. "Move up!" The platoon advanced, taking the position without further resistance. James removed the string from his barrel, tucked it away. His hands were shaking slightly, adrenaline and the weight of what he had just done. He had killed a man, not a target, a human being. The reality of that hit him harder than he expected. Sergeant Burke appeared beside him. "Hell of a shot, Mitchell, hell of a shot." The campaign in Sicily continued for weeks, hot and exhausting. James made other shots, some successful, some missed. The string technique proved as valuable in combat as it had on the range, but he also learned its limitations. In close quarters, in fast-moving situations, there was no time for careful wind reading. And even with perfect technique, sometimes luck mattered more than skill. But word spread among the battalion about the corporal with the string, about his seemingly impossible shots in difficult conditions. Other marksmen started asking him about the technique, started experimenting with it themselves. What had begun as a personal innovation was becoming, slowly, a recognized method. By the time Sicily fell in August, James had become one of the battalion's most respected sharpshooters. Not because of any single dramatic moment, but through consistent effectiveness, through reliable performance under pressure. The sergeants who had once mocked him now sought his advice. The lieutenant who had defended him recommended him for promotion. But beyond the recognition, beyond the validation, James had learned something more important. He had learned that innovation matters, that thinking differently can make a real difference, but also that techniques are only as good as the people using them. The string was a tool, nothing more. What mattered was the discipline, the patience, the endless practice, the willingness to keep learning and adapting. After Sicily came mainland Italy, the long, hard slog up the peninsula. Through the fall and winter of 1943 and into 1944, James and his company fought through mountains and mud, through bitter cold and constant danger. The string technique became second nature, something he and others could employ almost unconsciously. The Italian campaign was different from Sicily. Where Sicily had been hot and dusty, Italy was cold and wet. They fought through the Apennine Mountains, climbing rocky slopes, slogging through valleys turned to swamps by endless rain. The Germans had chosen their defensive positions brilliantly, taking advantage of every ridge, every river, every stone monastery and ancient villa. In October, outside a small town called Casino, James found himself part of a squad tasked with reconnaissance of German positions on Montelungo. They moved at night, climbing steep terrain in darkness, trying to identify enemy strongpoints and machine gun nests. Chen was with him, along with Rodriguez and 4 other soldiers from their original company. The climb was exhausting, made worse by the need for absolute silence. One wrong step, one dislodged rock, could alert German sentries and bring down fire on their position. They moved like ghosts, feeling their way more than seeing, testing each foothold before committing their weight. Halfway up the mountain, they found a German observation post, 2 soldiers in a shallow bunker carved into the rock. James spotted them first, the faint glow of a cigarette giving away their position. He signaled the squad to stop, to stay low. They were close enough that he could hear the Germans talking quietly in their language he did not understand, their voices carrying in the still night air. For several minutes, they waited, assessing the situation. The observation post was too close to bypass safely, but taking it out would alert other German positions. James made eye contact with Rodriguez, and in that silent communication built over months of combat, they reached an understanding. They would have to move silently, eliminate the threat without firing a shot. The next 5 minutes were the most terrifying of James's war. Moving inch by inch, controlling every breath, every muscle, advancing across open rock toward an enemy who could see them if they looked in the right direction. Rodriguez moved from one flank, James from the other, knives drawn, hearts pounding so loud they were sure the Germans would hear. When they struck, it was simultaneous and silent. The Germans never knew what happened. James felt sick afterward, kneeling beside the body of a man he had killed with his hands rather than his rifle, a man who might have been his age, who had a photograph of a young woman in his jacket pocket. But there was no time for reflection. They had a mission to complete. They continued up the mountain, mapped the German positions, and returned before dawn with intelligence that would help plan the next day's assault. Lieutenant Harrison, now a captain after battlefield promotion, commended them for their work, but James felt no pride, only a deep exhaustion that went beyond physical tiredness. In November, during fighting near San Pietro in Fine, James made a shot that would become legendary in the battalion, though he rarely spoke of it afterward. A German sniper had been terrorizing their position for 2 days, picking off soldiers who exposed themselves for even a moment. He was good, very good, and his position remained a mystery despite constant efforts to locate him. On the 3rd day, James decided to hunt the hunter. He studied the terrain for hours through binoculars, noting every possible sniper position, every window, every pile of rubble that could conceal a shooter. He watched the angle of shots that hit near their position, trying to calculate back trajectories. Chen helped him, using his engineering knowledge to narrow down possibilities. They identified 3 likely positions, all in the ruins of a stone church about 500 yards away. James set up in a concealed spot, his rifle resting on sandbags, string attached, and began the wait. He told no one what he was doing except Chen, who stayed with him, acting as spotter. Hours passed. The sun moved across the sky. James watched the 3 positions through his scope, waiting for any sign of movement, any hint of where the German sniper was hiding. His eyes ached. His body was cramped from holding position, but he waited. Late in the afternoon, Chen whispered, "Movement. Window on the right, 2nd floor." James shifted his scope, saw it, just the briefest flash of reflected light, probably from the German's own scope as he scanned for targets. Now James knew where he was, but knowing the position was not enough. The window was small, the interior dark. He could not see the sniper himself, only knew he was there somewhere. James would have to wait for the German to take a shot at someone else, would have to catch him in that moment of exposure. He felt sick about it, about using one of his fellow soldiers as bait, even unknowingly. but the alternative was to let the German sniper continue killing. Chen seemed to sense his thoughts. "It is the right call," Chen whispered. "You know it is." 30 minutes later, a soldier from another squad moved between positions, a quick dash that should have been safe. The German sniper fired, the crack of his rifle carrying clearly across the ruins. The American soldier went down, hit in the leg, screaming in pain. In that instant, James saw him. The German sniper, visible in the window for perhaps half a second as he worked his bolt-action rifle, preparing for a follow-up shot. It was enough. James had already read the wind, had already seen that conditions were favorable. His crosshairs were on the window, his finger on the trigger, his mind in that place where conscious thought disappeared and training took over. He squeezed. The shot seemed to take forever, though in reality it was less than a second. 500 yards, the bullet dropping and drifting, following the arc that physics and James's skill had set for it. Then impact. Through his scope, James saw the German sniper jerk backward, saw his rifle fall forward out of the window. The relief in the American position was palpable. Soldiers who had been pinned down for 2 days could finally move freely. The wounded soldier was evacuated quickly, would survive his wound. And James removed the string from his rifle and packed it away, feeling no sense of victory, only a grim satisfaction that he had done his job. That night, Captain Harrison found him in his foxhole. "Hell of a shot today, Mitchell. That sniper had cost us 4 men over 3 days. You ended that." "Just doing what I was trained for, sir," James replied. Harrison sat down on the edge of the foxhole, unusual for an officer. "Between us," he said quietly, "how do you handle it? The killing, I mean. The knowing that you are really good at it." James was silent for a long moment. "I think about the men on our side who get to go home because I did my job," he finally said. "I think about how every German soldier I stop is one less threat to my friends. And I try not to think about anything else, because if I do, it gets hard to function." Harrison nodded slowly. "I appreciate your honesty." He stood to leave, then added, "Keep doing what you are doing, Sergeant. Your skills save American lives. That matters more than anything. The winter of 1943 was brutal. They fought in snow and ice, in conditions that made combat almost impossible, but somehow continued anyway. James's string technique had to be adapted for cold weather, finding materials that would not freeze or become brittle. He experimented with different threads, eventually settling on a lightweight silk that Chen managed to procure from a supply sergeant. During a Christmas Eve ceasefire, unofficial and fragile, James found himself in a ruined farmhouse with Rodriguez, Chen, and several other soldiers from their wind-shooting training sessions. Someone had found a bottle of wine, and they passed it around, each man taking a small drink, trying to find some warmth, some comfort in the middle of war. "Remember Tocoa?" Rodriguez said, his voice soft with memory. "Remember when we thought training was hard? God, we were stupid. We were young," Chen corrected gently. "There is a difference." "Are we old now?" another soldier asked. "I am 23. "In here," James said, tapping his chest, "we are ancient. Out there," he gestured toward the dark night beyond the walls, "we are just kids trying to survive." They sat in silence after that, each man lost in his own thoughts, his own memories of home and peace and everything they had lost to war. The string technique had helped them survive, had given them an edge, but on a night like this, survival felt like a hollow victory. By the spring of 1944, James had been promoted to sergeant and was training new replacements in marksmanship and wind-reading techniques. Chen had been promoted too and helped develop more formalized training materials. Rodriguez had become a skilled marksman himself, the patience he had learned from wind shooting helping him in other aspects of soldiering. One evening in May, as they rested in a small Italian village between operations, Lieutenant Harrison, now Captain Harrison after his own promotion, sat down with James to share news. "Mitchell, I thought you would want to know. That report I wrote about your wind-reading technique, it made it all the way up to Army Ground Forces headquarters. They are including modified versions of your method in updated marksmanship training manuals. Not exactly as you do it. They have standardized and formalized it, but the core principles are there." James sat back, surprised. "Sir, I never expected anything like that." Harrison smiled. "Neither did I. But good ideas have a way of spreading when they prove valuable. You gave the army something useful. That is worth more than any medal." Over the following months, James occasionally encountered soldiers from other units who had learned variations of the string technique, who credited it with improving their shooting. It was strange and humbling to see something he had learned on a Montana ranch, something his father had shown him on quiet mornings hunting coyotes, become part of military doctrine. The war continued. James and his company participated in the invasion of southern France in August of 1944, then pushed into Germany itself as 1945 began. The string went with him, now joined by dozens of other soldiers using similar methods, each adapted slightly to their own preferences and needs. The fighting in Germany was brutal, desperate, the enemy knowing they were defending their homeland. James made shots he would remember forever, and others he tried hard to forget. He saw friends die, saw unspeakable things, experienced the full horror of combat. The string technique helped him do his job effectively, but it could not shield him from the psychological weight of war. When Germany surrendered in May of 1945, James was in Bavaria, exhausted, grateful to be alive, struggling to process everything he had experienced. The celebration around him felt distant, muted by all that had been lost to achieve this moment. He sat alone that evening, watching the sun set over the German countryside, and pulled out the last letter from his father that he carried with him always. He reread the final paragraph, about staying sharp, staying alive, staying himself. He had managed 2 out of 3, he thought. Whether he was still himself after everything he had seen and done, he was not entirely sure. But he was alive. And the string technique, the simple innovation that had seemed so foolish to sergeants on a Georgia training range, had helped him and countless others survive. It had turned mockery into respect, doubt into validation, a ranch kid's hunting trick into military doctrine. The journey home took weeks, processing through various camps, completing paperwork, waiting for transport. When James finally stepped off the train in Montana in July of 1945, his father was waiting on the platform, older and grayer than James remembered, but standing straight and strong. They embraced without words, both men understanding that some experiences cannot be spoken, can only be acknowledged in silence. Eventually his father stepped back, looking him over with a critical eye. "You made it home," the old man said simply. "I did." The string helped? James thought about those words, about everything that simple question encompassed. "It helped," he said, "but more than that, it taught me to trust myself, to stand by what I know works, even when others doubt. That lesson helped more than any technique." His father nodded slowly, a slight smile crossing his weathered face. "Then I taught you right." They walked to the truck together, father and son, both veterans now, both carrying wounds visible and invisible. The Montana wind blew across the plains, strong and steady, the same wind that had shaped James's childhood, that had taught him patience and observation, that had ultimately helped him survive a war half a world away. Years later, after James had returned to the ranch, after he had married and started his own family, after the nightmares had gradually faded and life had found a new normal, a young military historian visited him. The historian was researching innovations in marksmanship during World War II and had tracked down James's story. They sat on the porch of the ranch house, the same porch where James's father had first shown him the string technique decades earlier, and James shared his story, not just the successful shots or the moments of validation, but also the doubt, the fear, the weight of using that skill to take human lives. "What do you want people to understand about what happened?" the historian asked finally. James was quiet for a long moment, watching the wind move through the grass, thinking about all those young soldiers on the firing range at Camp Toccoa, about sergeants who learned to set aside pride for effectiveness, about the countless small innovations and adaptations that soldiers made throughout the war. "I want them to understand that progress often comes from unexpected places," he said slowly. "That sometimes the best solutions are simple ones. That mockery can become respect when you prove yourself through consistent performance. But most of all, I want them to understand that any technique, any innovation is only as good as the character and discipline of the person using it. The string was just a piece of cotton thread. What mattered was everything else. The patience, the practice, the willingness to stand by what I knew to be true, even when others doubted." He paused, then added, "And I want them to know that my father, a quiet rancher from Montana who rarely spoke about his own war, taught me the most important lesson of all. Stay sharp, stay alive, stay yourself. That matters more than any shooting technique ever could." The historian thanked him and left. James sat on the porch as the sun set, watching the wind move through the landscape he had fought so hard to return to. The string technique had made him known, had helped him survive, had become part of military history. But what he valued most was simpler and harder won, the knowledge that he had faced the greatest challenge of his generation with honor and effectiveness. That he had stood firm when others doubted, and that he had made it home to the land and the people he loved. The wind picked up, strong and steady from the northwest, the same wind that had always blown across these Montana plains. James smiled slightly, stood up, and walked inside to where his family waited, where life continued its precious, ordinary rhythms, where the wars of the past gave way to the peace of the present and the hope of the future.